Okay, guys. I'm going to ask if everyone can hear me so that we can. There's no point in me carrying on if at the end of the day, after about 20 minutes, someone says, I didn't hear a word of it. So I'm assuming, unless somebody screams or does that, or leaves the auditorium, that you can all hear me loud and clear, and that you can all see the screen that I'm sharing.
Yeah, I have the message service on, so if anyone has any problems, just hit me up in the message box.
So I'm in uncharted territory in terms of timings. This is a chunk of my full talk. It should take 30 to 40 minutes to go through, but don't shoot the messenger is all I'm going to say if my timings are off, but it won't be far off. Okay, so this is Know Your Rights. It's a talk that I'm doing all over the place, according to the police, completely illegally. But they're as good as gold as long as you beat them to it and you get into the venue before they can get there to stop you from getting in. Maybe more about that later. So I'm introducing the gentle art of peaceful, self-loving, sovereign non-compliance. Now, let's break this down. It's gentle. We're not getting angry with anyone, and we're certainly not getting angry with ourselves. It's an art form, and hopefully it'll be a science soon. It's peaceful. We never break the peace because that's one of the main laws that we must abide by. It's self-loving. A huge component of this is self-love. It's self-respect. We're doing this because we respect ourselves. We love and respect ourselves far more than we love and respect governance, which we suspect of having dark agendas, which I'm not going to go into. This is not a conspiracy talk, but there'll be shades, undertones of conspiracy that the more researched will be able to spot. We're sovereign. We're sovereign because that's how we're born. We're born equal with everybody else under the law. Nobody is above us. We have to give our consent before we surrender any of that sovereignty. And we're non-compliant because at the moment, compliance is actually dangerous. Compliance is a crime against humanity. There's nothing less than that. Compliance is not polite. It's not nice. It's not considerate. It's a crime against humanity. And it's certainly a crime against yourself. So I'm going to use some strong language, obviously not foul language, but I'm going to use some strong language just to hammer home my points. Right, let's see if I can get this next bit right. Should be that. Yeah, right, 2 parts. This week is part 1. Next week will be part 2, and there will be a part 3, which will be mainly Q&A and people giving updates on whether and how they've started to use this technology. So in part 1, we're going to discover who we really are at law and what our sovereign rights are. Next week, we'll look at how to assert those rights and how to be ourselves safely. Okay, part 1. Houston, we have a problem. And this is the problem, folks. It's compliant fear of authority. It's not our compliant fear of authority, unless that's the state we're in. It's the majority that surround us, that snitch on us, that call the police when we keep the shop open, that call the police then when we don't come home for 8 hours when we should have been at home all day. This is the big problem. It's compliant fear of authority. The snitches, the narcissists, psychopaths, and sociopaths that are empty shells and who have nothing better to do with their empty little lives than to snitch on other people. And when you've got Cressida Dick and Ian Hopkins, Chief Constable of Manchester, encouraging people to snitch, I mean, I would regard that as a conspiracy to incite crime, a kind of a crime, but personal trespass at common law. So I don't think anyone's argued that officially, but that's my tentative feeling. It's a crime what they're doing. Anyway, so let's have a look at what we can do about compliance and fear of authority. Right, and this is where it gets legal. Okay, so if you look closely, I'm going to dwell on this screen because it's very important. This sovereignty is derived from your creator, my creator, our creator. Some call it God, some call it prime creator, some call it the universe. It doesn't matter what you call it, it exists because if it didn't exist, neither would you. But you do, so it must do. Now that creates a universal law. The law of the universe keeps the universe in balance. And we are sons and daughters of the universe living under natural law. So I'm going down from the very top of the screen. Now, as sons and daughters, when we arrive on planet Earth, or Gaia, our mother, our true mother, then we have a status of boy, girl, and then we become man, woman. And then if we have babies, we become father, mother, and have sons and daughters. Notice that I'm avoiding the word parents and children because that's down below. We'll come to that in a minute. So this is your natural sovereign status on the land, where you have unalienable rights, where you are a living soul. And if you go from top left, let's say I've got a cursor there. Oops. My cursor is now on the word real, and I'm now moving it across to living. So you're real, you're alive, you're in the private. Remember that. That's a huge concept, private. I mean, to be told you're alive isn't quite so huge because I think you kind of knew that. Private is massive. Lawful, I think you kind of knew that you were lawful. De jure means that you're in accordance with the law of the land, constitutional common law. So all these statuses, and the plural of man, woman is people, men and women or people, all these statuses are natural statuses. With those statuses, you carry around with you in your heart and in your mind and in your soul and in your spirit those sovereign rights that you're born with. But what happens is you get tricked into surrendering them, and we'll come to that in a minute. If at any point in your life you appear to be faced with someone who's professing to have authority over you, it's only because under constitutional law that they have been sworn in as an officer under oath, serving the private people. So if you're approached by what appears to be a man in a policeman's uniform, that is a constable as far as you're concerned, and the constable is under oath or under attestation. Some of them are under attestation, but it amounts to the same thing, to serve the people and uphold the law. Now, the law that they're upholding is this universal law, which is, and you'll see on the middle line under common law, cause no harm, cause no loss, cause no fraud to other living souls, and keep the peace. That's one phrase that's missing there. Keep the peace. So if you are abiding by those four basic tenets of sovereign common law, constitutional law, you are lawful, you are untouchable, and the constable will bid you good day if you cannot assist him in the witnessing of a crime, because you won't have committed a crime. So he may tap you on the shoulder and say, excuse me, a crime has been committed. Could you assist me, please? And if you are a witness to a crime, then you'll give some assistance. But in any other situation, that constable has no business talking to you on the assumption that you have not committed one of these four basic common law crimes of causing harm, loss, fraud, or breaching the peace. Now, that's all well and good, and we're not taught this either at school or in law school or anywhere. Barristers, judges haven't got a clue about any of this. Some of them might have. Some of the Illuminati Masonic judges will know. They're given a black book when they get to a certain level, and the black book reveals what the true law actually is, including Talmudic law and all kinds of laws that apply spiritual principles, some benevolent and some malevolent. But what's being applied in everyday life is not the law of the land, but the law of the sea. The law of the sea was created by the Venetian bankers because they were not on the land. Venice, as I'm sure you all know, is on the sea. It's underwater. So they decided in their little evil cleverness to create a law that applies to the sea, but at the same time, in other words, to evade the operation of God's law, universal law, which only applies to the land in their eyes, and they decided that they would create their own law for the sea. And this law was the law of commerce. It eventually became the law of maritime trade between nations, and then warfare between countries. So this law is not the law that applies to the man, the woman, the boy, or the girl, unless they get confused and lose sight of who they are and maybe become one of these. And we all recognize all these statuses. This is not an exhaustive list. This is just a sample of all these statuses that we adopt as we grow up. Is child? Yeah, child is on there. Okay, so we start out with child, and we think we're born. We think we're a child, and we think we're born to parents. No, these are legal, maritime, commercial concepts. So the Venetian bankers decided that they would trap our energy by creating a fiction world, a world of fiction based on the birth certification process. And I won't go down that rabbit hole. Basically, and to cut a long story short, when your parents register your birth, they are registering you. They are in effect taking you off the land into dry dock, down the birth canal into dry dock, which is why the doctor births you. Dock. So your vessel, which is your physical body, is docked, and a number and a name is assigned to it. The government create the full name, the full legal name, and even under God's law, universal law, whoever creates something owns it. They didn't create you, they created your birth name, your full birth certificated name. So later on in life, if you get confused, and why wouldn't you be, because no one's told you this until today, if you operate your birth certificated name unwittingly and without any thought about it whatsoever, you are surrendering to the law of the sea, commercial law, government control. So, especially if you're a driver, you hear about people saying, no, I'm not a driver, I'm a traveler. But the commercial law works on presumption. And if you're driving a car with a registered plate, you are in the law, you are in the world, the commercial, the maritime world of commerce. Recently, an enforcement agent knocked on a door, and our hero said, what are you doing here? I'm a man under common law, upholding my rights to freedom, privacy, etc. And the agent said, I'm not here under common law, I'm here under maritime law. So they're even admitting it openly. Agents will call under maritime law. They're calling to in effect, seize something. And they need a name and address in order to seize something. But more about that later. So there you go. You've got name, address. If you're a taxpayer, you're in the law of the sea. You're de facto. De facto means they make it up as they go along, and they don't feel any conscience. They feel no remorse, partly because they're narcissists, psychopaths, and sociopaths, and partly because they've rationalized the whole process and justified it on the basis that they're not on the land. It's all seagoing activity. And they're operating piracy principles, that if you don't know who you are, in effect, you are a vessel that is not flying a flag and therefore open to piracy. Other statuses, citizen. Somebody emailed me today and said, David, are you interested in citizens' assemblies? And I said, nope, that's a commercial slave status. Forget it. Resident, no, that's how the council get you for tax, because you admit to being a resident. Public health, right, officer. Let's look at constable and officer. So constable is the law-abiding officer, duly appointed, who's sworn an oath to protect you and uphold the law. He's your friend, or she. If I say he, please assume she as well. Yeah, it just saves time and energy. So But if they, like I did the other day, outside this venue where we were barred from getting in the end, I did the talk outside, and we had a beautiful little tete-a-tete with 30 officers, 30 constables, well, 30 officers actually, trying to engage with them. They were trying to get us to contract with them, nothing doing. We asked them, "Are you constables standing under your oath?" No reply. So that was a tacit admission that they are officers, duty bound to enforce commercial law and, in effect, representatives and agents of the banking system, which is why they charge you. It's all about charging your legal name. So they are, an officer is a dead corporation, a fiction, working in the public domain, working with no de jure legal authority. They call it legal. Well, in their world, it's legal. In our world, it's unlawful. But they trick us into accepting it. So you could say it's kind of legal because we're not savvy enough to call it out. And in their system, if we don't call it out, we are deemed to accept it. More about that later. So all these constructive capacities, they're not real, they're fictional. We all recognize them, and at some time or another, we've all stood by them, and that's where they get us. That's where we are very vulnerable. In order to be safe and sound, we have to stand firm as men, women, boys and girls, and that's it. You know, even if you're a patient, a doctor's patient, that's one thing missing from the lower list. Patient, you don't want to be a patient. You don't want to be a customer. These are all commercial concepts. If you ever wondered why your doctor doesn't treat you with respect, it's because you are a commercial entity. You're not a man or a woman when you visit your doctor. You're a registered patient. When you register anything, you surrender authority to the state, and the state will do with you as it wishes. And doctors are trained to treat you like commodities. You do have the odd doctor that's got a conscience, and they will meet you halfway. But if they release any information that will actually do you holistic good, they will do it in hushed tones and probably ask you to swear a vow of secrecy. That's if they tell you at all. Because their job's on the line. They're in the world of commerce. They're peddling drugs. Now, I'm going off on one now, so I'm going to rein myself in because I want to stick to the law. So, constable and officer. Constable is your friend. Officer, well, to call him or her your enemy is maybe overstating it, but in 2020, they are your enemy. They really are your enemy now. They have to be a constable to be a friend, but they're being called out as officers. And that's a public status, it's a commercial status, and they're looking for trouble. Right, so let's go back to the idea of public and health, just to give you an idea of how this works, what it actually means in practice, a bit of a bigger picture. Look, right, if you follow the logic that public is commercial and dead and fictitious, health no longer makes sense in the way that we understand the word health. It's now legalese, it's now commercial Venetian banking language. So in Venetian legalese banking language, public health is defined as profitability. There you go. I'm just going to pause while that sinks in. COVID-19, or whatever it means to you, as a public health measure, is therefore an economic process. And this is your logic that tells you, however much research you've done, it tells you in no uncertain terms that we are dealing with economics and finance, not with medical or social issues. Well, we're dealing with social issues, but it's socio-economic, it's not socio-medical. Okay? So this is evidence of the hoax. Government is a service corporation. Now, government, if you break the word down, govern is to control, and ment is the mind. It's a service corporation. It makes policies. It doesn't make law. So you can see there, it makes policies for legal fictions or persons. So on that list below in the maritime law list, the Venetian bankers list, you saw that there was persons there. Those persons are the fictions that are named on your birth certificate. You become a person in their system. I think the Bible has something about, do not, I can't remember the precise wording, but it's about be very cautious about persons. They are not men and women. So the government, and again, lawyers, judges don't understand this. These so-called eminent people think that government makes law. It doesn't. It makes policy. The government is. We are surrounded by. I was going to say living in. Well, we're not living in a corporation, but we are embossed over the land that we call England. Is a corporation called United Kingdom PLC. And our so-called government is, in effect, the board of directors, a board of officers working for the Prime Minister, who is the CEO of UK PLC. Now, what PLC or corporation makes laws? Think about it. None. Could you imagine McDonald's making laws that apply to you? They make laws. Well, they make rules, they make policies for their employees, and they may make policies for their customers, but the customers will be your person, not your manhood or womanhood. So the government does not make law for men or women. Let that sink in just for a little while. This goes against most of what against everything we're ever taught, to be honest. So government does not make law. Government is subject to the law, which is cause no harm, cause no loss, cause no fraud, keep the peace. And the government, just like the constable, is our appointed agent under oath of office. But they wear at least two hats, probably three hats. One is a Masonic hat, one is the UK PLC hat, and one is the People's Representative hats. What we need is a government that wears one hat only, representing, as men or women, the men or women of the land. That's all we need. So their rules have the colour of law and only the force of law with our consent. Even Theresa May said that, and maybe that's one reason why she was taken out. She was starting to come clean. So it has the colour of law. It's not law. We have to consent. So a government mandate, whatever you understand by the word mandate, is a contradiction in terms for men, women, boys and girls. So the idea of mandatory vaccines, it's a nonsense. If you're a government employee, then you'll only keep your job if you take the vaccine. So in that sense, it's mandatory. But everybody else, no way. There's no such thing. It's a contradiction in terms. Just remember, you have sovereign rights. You have to consent in order for something that they say is law, which isn't law, it's just policy, can have the force of law. It can never be law, but it can have the force of law with your consent. So all this means, if you distill everything, that mask wearing, social distancing, vaccination, self-isolating, track and tracing, test and tracing, acceptance or payments of so-called penalty notices and fines are all voluntary acts with no exceptions. Yes, of course, that they can trick you, they can coerce you, they can bully you into consenting stroke accepting, but they are still voluntary acts. If you know what you're doing and you are forced into some kind of acceptance, then you can make that acceptance favorable to you using terms and conditions, but more about that next week. So all those phenomena are voluntary acts. End of. No compromise here. This is not no ifs and buts. They are track and tracing are also breaches of their regulations called General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. I mean, to track somebody without their consent. I mean, if that isn't a criminal breach of GDPR, I don't know what is. So the law of the land is common law and imposes the social contract to cause no harm, no loss, no fraud, and no breach of the peace. All other so-called laws are no more than social rules or corporate etiquette expressed in legal language known as legalese. Let's have a couple of examples of legalese as opposed to plain English. And the problem is that we only studied English to level 2 because they stopped teaching English when we were about 7 or 8, and then they gave us spelling tests and literature, and they stopped teaching us English grammar. So we all have the grammar of children, and I use that term loosely, boys and girls, if you like. We don't have an adult grasp of English grammar, and that's another thing, another trick that's been played on us. So when you see a sign that says all persons traveling on Metrolink must wear a face covering, well, you know it's not referring to you, because you know, especially if you've been to this presentation, you're not a person. So it can't apply to you. Oops, sorry about that. Go back. So not being a person, you know that you can, when I got on the Metrolink in Manchester, when I see that sign, I just have a good giggle. There's another clue if you know your legalese, the word must. Must in legalese, if you look it up in Black's Law Dictionary or Bouvier's, Bouvier's online law dictionary, must, since we're men and women, an obligation can only be imposed without consent. So must, therefore, equals may. Okay? May, brackets, subject to our consent. So let me paraphrase this. Let's translate it. All men and women who have no idea who they are, but only identify with their legal fiction name assigned to them at birth, may, with their consent, wear a face covering, whatever a face covering is. I mean, that could be, I regard my skin as my face covering. You know, I've had it since birth. It's my face covering. Here's another one, legalese against plain English. Your child must. Well, this is total gobbledygook. You, if you'd studied English beyond level 2, and I didn't either, you and your is plural. Singular, second person in English is thee, thou, thy. And there's a song by the Kaiser Chiefs that actually correctly uses the word thee. About, I predict a riot, I think it is. I predict a riot. I think they use the word thee in it. Excuse me. So this is gobbledygook. So that's plural. So you don't know who it's addressing. Child, we know, is a legal concept assigned to the government, property of the government. It's not a boy, it's not a girl, it's not a living soul. And we know that must is may. So this is just total nonsense. And then it says social distance. Well, that's medical nonsense. Okay? Distancing is antisocial. So there's, you know, this makes sense on, and how can a legal concept keep any kind of distance for any reason from another legal concept? Legal fiction keeping a distance from another legal fiction. How is that even possible? As a sovereign man or woman, we are all born with unalienable rights as a living soul. These are only surrendered by consent or if we break one of the 4 laws. Cause no harm, cause no loss, cause no fraud, keep the peace. These rights, by the way, unalienable, lien there is something that can be taken from you. It's something that can be attached to you and reduce you in some way. And it's a commercial concept, really. So unalienable means no one can take them from you, basically, unless you surrender them voluntarily. So these unalienable rights include the right to life, and the right to life for you guys includes, of course, the right to earn a living, a lawful living. For mask wearers or non-mask wearers, the right to breathe fresh air. Why on earth would anyone obstruct fresh air reaching their oral cavity? And health, some people say, and I'm one of them, that good health starts in the oral cavity. Heart disease and cancer start in the oral cavity. It will soon come to light that dentistry is probably at cause for most disease patterns. Not all, obviously, but for most. Cancer-causing amalgams and heart disease-causing root canal treatments. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent again. Right to life, the right to privacy. Remember, for those of you who remembered that screen, you were on the land, you were private. The Crown, the government, the officers, the agents have no business with you as a private man as long as you stand on that privacy. The right to freedom of movement. No one can stop you as long as you're causing no harm, loss, damage, as long as you're not breaching the peace. Nobody can stop you. No one. Peaceful assembly. You can gather for whatever lawful purpose. No one can stop you. Right to freedom of speech. You can say what you like, as long as it's not a breach of the peace or liable to cause harm. If it's just an opinion about things going on, you're entitled to express it. Publish thoughts. Okay, now if you're in a commercial forum like Facebook may have a policy that you've signed up for, and they deplatform you because for whatever reason they don't like what you're saying. Well, you can go elsewhere. So that's not strictly a breach of your right to publish thoughts, because you can go elsewhere. You can create your own forum. It's only when you create your own forum and they come looking for you there, then that's a serious breach of sovereignty. But I think if they're just deplatforming you on YouTube and Facebook, not necessarily a breach of your sovereignty. It's debatable. It's a moot point. But because you can just go out on the street and say what you want to say. As long as we can still do that, we have enough freedom to be going on with. Having the right to say what we want to say on Facebook and YouTube is a value-added bonus, but not fundamental in my opinion. It's annoying when you get deplatformed, obviously, but but no more than annoying in my book. Fair trial by your peers. Yeah, so they say, here's a fine. You've been a naughty boy or girl. Hang on a minute. I have a right to fair trial. You can't fine me. The only people that can judge me and tell me I've done wrong and ask me, not tell me, they have to ask you to pay a fine, is a jury of my peers. Thank you very much. So these so-called fines, these threats of fines, it's pure applied psychology. That's all it is. Even in their system, it's certainly applied psychology at common law, but even in their legalese system, they've got no right to do it. COVID was downgraded on March the 19th. So they have not got, even in their system, any authority to do anything about anyone. Because once they downgraded COVID to a non-high consequence disease, Coronavirus Act was waste paper. The right to worship. Well, there's some clergy that need to hang their head in shame because they are not standing by their congregation's right to worship. Which is a shame. So basically, the blessing of 2020, and there are many, many, many blessings, let me tell you. I'm feeling nothing but blessings, to be honest, because this has been the year where I actually realized why I was born. So the blessing of 2020 in this context is we're now seeing which churches, mosques, synagogues are standing under Satan, under the law of the bankers, or standing under God or under the divine creator. Very interesting. Doesn't seem to be a particularly high number standing under God, to be honest. In fact, it's a very low number. This is massive, this one. The right to silence, the right not to self-incriminate. And even people who've been to my talks, this one is very hard to take on board, because we've all been indoctrinated into want to help our super cop heroes. We all had cop heroes, Starsky and Hutch, Ironside, I'm showing my age now, Bodie and Doyle. Someone's going to, the younger ones can fill in the blanks for the younger heroes. And when a cop taps us on the shoulder and asks us a question, the first thing we want to do, it's a knee-jerk reaction, we want to cooperate. We want to make their life easier. But that's for the television. In real life, if you haven't committed a crime, they're only tapping you on the shoulder, figuratively speaking, obviously, because they want to trap you in some way. If you have committed a crime, they don't tap you on the shoulder. They just take you away and they ask questions later. So if you're being asked questions, you are being tapped to self-incriminate. So stay silent. If you do say anything, next week we will look at what you can say and maintain your integrity and your sovereignty without surrendering any rights. But silence is golden in this concept. If you're asked a question by an officer, silence. It's not the kind of silence that will harm you. Okay, there are other forms of silence that can harm you, and I'll differentiate between the two next week. As sovereign by birth, we are all equal under the law. An obligation to do anything can therefore only exist by contract or by consent. So nobody, however many stripes they've got on their uniform, however arrogant and condescending and however thunderous their tone of voice. Well, if it's a thunderous tone of voice, that's a narcissist. Then it doesn't matter. You are their equal. And in fact, if they're standing under an oath, you are their employer and master. At the end of the evening in Preston on Thursday, where we gave the talk outside, I got the superior officer to admit that we are his paymasters. I said, now you can go and catch some real criminals. And he said, yes, that's what you pay for. So that was his secret admission that we are the boss. But he couldn't say that in front of his assembled troops. Now, silence can work against you under their law, which is the law of maritime, the maritime commercial law, Roman civil law, call it what you like. He who remains silent when he ought to have spoken was able to is taken to agree. Now, remaining silent in the face of a question is safe. It's only remaining silent when you're asked to accept something. So if you're asked to accept something as true, legal or valid, and you say nothing, your consent or agreement is presumed under Roman civil law, lex mercatoria, commercial law. Whereas under common law, you're presumed innocent, you're presumed not to consent unless you actually do consent. But under commercial law, if you say nothing, if somebody makes a proposal, not a question, it's very important. This isn't a question like, what's your name? If you stay silent, that's perfect. You haven't surrendered anything. But if they endeavor to trap you in some way, give you some kind of assertion, then you have to say, you're breaking the law. Now you just say, I do not consent. You're infringing COVID law. I do not consent. I do not agree, or whatever. So you have to say something. If you say nothing, then they can start to imply that you're accepting their jurisdiction. But more about that next week. So your consent is presumed, except, like I said, when you are exercising the right to remain silent and not to self-incriminate under common law. When you are being asked questions. If you're being asked questions, it is perfectly safe to remain silent. And you can just say, I'm exercising my right to remain silent under common law. Okay, keeping it nice and simple. So these sovereign rights are presumed surrendered in three situations, essentially. When one, we've broken the law, so breach of the peace, cause no harm, cause no loss, cause no fraud, or we are a driver in a vehicle. Now, these are only presumptions. If you're a driver in a vehicle, it's not you that's vulnerable, it's the vehicle. The vehicle is owned by the state, which is why you're the keeper and not the owner. So I won't go into that in too much detail, but as long as you keep the windows, one of my students today learned the hard way that by winding the window down, she became vulnerable because the police officer just grabbed the keys. If she'd have kept the window to open just 1 inch, they wouldn't have got in. They would have surrounded her for an hour or two, and it would have been very unpleasant, but she would have got away eventually. You are vulnerable in the sense that they could possibly pursue the vehicle. So find some excuse to impound the vehicle. And if they're doing evil, they might find something. But you, as a man or a woman, even as a driver, you personally are not vulnerable, but the vehicle might be in certain circumstances. If you're reasonably suspected of being infected, again, it has to be a high consequence infectious disease under their COVID rules, but you don't have to worry about COVID. It was downgraded, so this doesn't apply currently. Number two, well, we have technologies to avoid problems with number two. And the obvious way to avoid number one is don't break the law. So basically, the bottom line is that your rights are never really surrendered at the moment. And they certainly wouldn't be once you've got the knowledge that we're going to have by the end of this series. Am I obliged to give my name and address? This is the first question that people ask. And surrender my right to privacy and to silence? Well, of course not. But like I said, if you don't, then there may be consequences if you have broken the common law. There may be consequences under the Road Traffic Act if you're the driver of a vehicle. And there may be consequences if they have evidence that you're infected with a serious or high consequence disease. But generally, the answer is no. So just repeating, am I ever obliged to give my name and address? No. End of. Human Rights Act, well, I have to mention this because it's in their domain, it's not in ours, because we're human in legalese translates as monster. So we're not monsters, we're sovereign men and women who are evolving and ascending. So we're certainly not monsters. In their eyes, we are useless eaters and useful idiots. And they have a genocidal agenda to reduce the population to nothing but androids, robots, narcissists, psychopaths, and sociopaths, transhumans. But we are here to fight this, and we're at the front line, guys. This is World War III, and we're at the front line. Takes a bit of getting used to. World War III has been threatened for some time. It started in the 1950s, but it's now coming out now. It was a Cold War, a covert war, but now it's becoming more and more overt. A war by corporations using governments against their own people. So the Human Rights Act does not mention men or women, so you can take the Human Rights Act with a pinch of salt. And it protects humans, but humans are monsters. So you can get into a bit of a tangle. If you know the common law, you don't need the Human Rights Act. But in a worst case scenario, you could quote it and they'll understand it if they don't understand common law. So it's not going to, it won't do any harm, but it wouldn't be my first port of call, put it that way. Any legislation is a pretense, which is why they call it an act. They call them acts exactly for that reason. It's telling us in plain sight that they are not real. Only your common law rights are real, and only if, one, you know you have them, you know they exist, and you know they apply to you. Two, you're ready to stand on them. And three, you know how to stand on them. So we've dealt today with number one. Number two is something that obviously by the tone of some of your voices and some of your contributions before I started, you certainly are ready to stand on them. And for those who are half ready, hopefully by next week, you'll be fully ready. So next week, we'll look at number three, how to stand on them. And that is the end of part one.